Day. I'm the host, Clint. We don't have our co-host, Ken, with us today. Ken's off enjoying himself. I hope he's not watching this live. Whoa, hey, come on, you can do it. Focus. There we go. There you go. I hope he's not watching this live, but I hope he is enjoying himself. On today's Ziti TV, let's take a look at what we plan. Oh, hopefully you like the music. It's just me today. So if you want to chat, let me know. I'm here to answer questions. I'm here to also talk about self-hosting BrowZer again, which is exciting. We've been doing a lot of work around BrowZer. We've had Kurt on a couple of times. If you're new to OpenZiti and you're new to BrowZer, I'm going to give you a real quick little primer here. And what we do always on Ziti TVs, well, not always, but usually on Ziti TVs, is we will actually go out and look at the changelog and see if there's any new release notes to be had. Just so happens I went and checked it out, and there are indeed some release notes to be had for this week that are important. So I thought we'd go over them. I don't want to make that bigger. I want to do, that's what I want to do. Perfect. All right. So this release 0.30 has some interesting changes to it. And the most important here is the link management is now delegated to routers, which is cool. So as you can see, previously the controller would do its best to determine where links needed to be established. It would send messages to routers, etc. And with this release, the controller only lets routers know that other routers exist, and they are responsible for forming links. And some cool, some cool features or changes that come along with that is this idea of link groups. That's, I think, a really interesting and exciting idea. So OpenZiti, let's go back now to the overlay. Let's look at the overview I said. So OpenZiti, what it is, it's an overlay network technology, a secure overlay. And as you can see, it's made of these things called edge routers or routers and a controller or controllers. And so these little routers, we can see where we have 4 little routers here, they all go together to form a mesh. And so generally speaking, when you, up until this 0.30 release, when you made an edge router, any other router that said connect to me, all the other routers would try to connect to them. And all routers tried to connect to all other routers. And that's cool, it makes a full mesh, right? But with this release, we have this idea of link groups. So now both dialers and listeners can specify a set of groups. If no group is specified, you get default. But dialers will only attempt to dial listeners who have at least one group in common with them, which is really neat because prior, you couldn't actually make a topology that looks like this. Notice I've only got one little arrow connecting this edge router. Actually, one right here. These edge routers, one arrow, one arrow, one arrow. In the past, you would have gotten a link to this router, a link to that router, and a link to this router, and then from this router to that router, and then from this router to that router, and then from this router to that router. So you'd basically get an n-1 factorial kind of number of links. Now you can actually go through and specify this edge router can only dial this particular edge router, which is super exciting to me. This is something I've wanted to be able to do for a long time. Gives you a little bit more control over your overlay mesh, and I think that is a killer feature. So if we go down and we look at what the configuration looks like, boop, 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 where did it go? Right down here. You can see you can now specify this groups in your dialers section, in the links section of that. And then, boop, boop, I don't know if we have another example where the, it's not a dialer, but it's a listener with a, oh, there's one. VPC 1234, VPC 1234. YAML syntax, so don't get thrown off by the fact that this has a minus and this one doesn't have a minus. It's just an array. And so, yeah, well, actually, yeah, it says groups, so maybe I'll have to ask Paul, but I expect the listener is also an array. Pretty sure it is, I would imagine, since it says groups. But we can always figure that out later. Anyway, OpenZiti, like I said, little overview. What OpenZiti is, secure networking technology, really built with the main premise that zero trust, marketing buzzword that you've maybe heard before, interesting ideas behind that, meaning don't trust the network, have explicit trust, like no anonymous access effectively. But OpenZiti built around all SDKs. So SDK first design, that means what we really want you to do is take those zero trust principles and embed them into your application itself. And that would be cool. So if you have a zero trust application embedded application, you don't have to even trust your local host's network. You can have all that trust built into your application. So that's really neat stuff. I'm not going to get into it too deeply, but if you haven't seen OpenZiti, you should go out to the docs and take a look. Oh, also, if you haven't seen, I guess this is neat. Check out the homepage. Hey, redesign coming. Look at this. Look, all these little, we got a little wizard. He's floating around the screen also effortlessly. So yeah, OpenZiti's homepage also gets a redesign. Shout out to our friend Dave Finger, doing the needful here, doing some cool work. You can come down, see some animations, some little hovers, keep the same kind of data, but it just looks a little bit nicer. Same sort of stuff here. You can see this is always work in progress. So, you know, if there's any thoughts, changes, you can always come in. Like this was a nice, maybe I'll ping Dave Finger after this and let him know that these things are not aligned. So that's a good example of, you know, some feedback that would be useful. Anyway, yeah, OpenZiti landing page also redesigned. Let's go back to the changelog, see if there's anything else interesting in here. Controller and routers operate with a single listener port. Oh yes, that is also exciting and interesting. I have not tried this myself. Single sort changes, I assume, is meant to be port changes. This is a useful little feature too. I've not used it. The quick starts aren't updated. So if you go out and try to use it yourself, you're blazing some new ground, but the controller now supports this. And what this is when you install a controller, if you follow the quick start, you're going to get two ports that the controller opens. One port is for API type stuff, and one port is for control plane type stuff. And then the same is true for routers. So if you turn a router on, the router will have a port for control plane communication, and it will have a port for edge communication. So now, again, I'm just brand new to me too, so we're learning this together. So now we do support this thing called ALPN, or as you can see, Application Layer Protocol Negotiation. Whew, that's a mouthful, isn't it? But basically it allows the controller or the router to understand what protocol is being negotiated and send it to the correct handler. So that's neat. Like I said, I haven't tried it yet, but where that's useful is it'll let you have only one open port in your firewall to get through to the bits that the controller needs, or one open firewall hole for your router. And that's nice because a lot of times, like if you look at the way CloudZiti does things, we use port 443 and port 80 because most firewalls don't block them. And so they're convenient ones to choose. But if you follow our quick start, you'll notice you'll need at least 4 ports. You need that control plane port for the controller. You need the API port for the edge on the controller. You need the data plane port on the router for edge clients like your tunneler or your SDKs. And you'll optionally want, I mean, maybe you need 5. You might need ZAC too, the Ziti admin console. And then you also might need one for other routers to link into your public router. So you could have anywhere from, with one quick start, up to 5 ports that you particularly need to open. And today, I'm going to add more ports to that. Also, don't get confused. So like a lot of times, you'll hear OpenZiti talk about no open ports. And really, that's a important distinction. The overlay network, you can't get away from open ports for the overlay network itself. You have to have some open ports somewhere because that's how OpenZiti works. So you'll need a public router. Actually, let's go back to our diagram. If I can go back here, you'll need a public port somewhere that some SDK could connect into. So this edge router port will need to be open so that the SDK can communicate to the edge router. And this controller port up here will need to be open so that the SDK can talk to the controller. And this controller port over here will need to be open so that this router can talk to the controller, etc. So this ALPN stuff helps reduce a couple of these ports that are necessary fun stuff. It'll help Cloud Ziti do more deployments on fewer machines. It'll also help you do the same sort of thing. Again, I haven't used it yet, so if you ask me questions, maybe I can get Eugene on the phone because he just implemented all this and it's a dripping wet, interesting new feature. Anyway, that's not what we're here for today. It's a little bit of background about OpenZiti, just in general. Oh, what is BrowZer? Yeah, so what we're talking about today, where's my little slide, right? We're talking about BrowZer. Oh, and I've also realized, let's bring me back on the screen. Hey, I'm back. All right. So we're talking about BrowZer again, and what is BrowZer? BrowZer is also really interesting and exciting new technology. Kurt's been working on it for a long time. Very complex stuff where we're going to basically bootstrap a zero trust connection in your browser without the need to install anything in your browser. So no extensions necessary, no client-side installs. So really useful for, I won't say anonymous because zero trust is not about anonymous access, but it's about people who can't install extensions or don't want to for whatever reason, right? So BrowZers is really exciting technology, and what we're going to see today, assuming the demo gods align, is we're going to access the Ziti administration console, and we're going to do it using BrowZer. And what will that look like? I've got 8 million windows open here, so forgive me while I root around looking for the right one. Failed to find the right one, so I'll bring this over to here. Here's an example. I think I called it BrowZer, I think. Yeah. So here's what we're going to do. I have set up a domain called browzerexample.demo.openziti.org. You could go here right now. If you want to try it, try it. It won't work. It'll send you over to Auth0, a OIDC provider. And what it will do is it'll ask you to log in. When you log in, if you choose to, then Auth0 will actually send an email address back to my OpenZiti instance with your email address in it. So I'm going to see it. Maybe you don't care. Maybe you do, but FYI. And then if your identity matches an identity that I have provisioned, then you will be able to get at my Ziti administration console through BrowZer. And so let's see what that might look like. And so you see I come in. I'm going to continue with Google. I'm already logged in. And so it already authenticated me, and now it's sending me over to the Ziti administration console, and bam, I have just provided the Ziti administration console access through BrowZer through so this port is listening. You can see it has to be listening, but this is not where the software actually lives. This is the overlay connect. This is how you bootstrap the whole entire zero trust connection, is just by going here. And so this is exciting and interesting stuff, because what you'll see later is this web server is actually listening on HTTP, not HTTPS. And yet, if you look up here, I have a connection is secure icon. How is that possible? So that's the sort of stuff that we're going to get into today. I think that's super exciting. I hope you think it's super exciting. I'm not even putting on the fake excited voice. I actually do think it's exciting. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to tear it all down, and we're going to hopefully, if my instructions work the way they're supposed to, we're going to put it all back together, right? As I like to say, we're going to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. If you also wanted to follow along, you can go to this URL right here. It's going to get merged, but this is just my pull request, right? So I'm working on this documentation, like have been for like a month. So you could try this out too if you wanted to, but we're going to do it together here. And so that's what the documentation is. And the first thing I need to do is I need to turn everything off. So let's go ahead and turn everything off. Let me see if I come over to here and make sure I'm not going to share any kind of things that are secret. You never know what kind of stuff happens here. BrowZer. No, I need to go back to my home. I'm on a different screen right now. Just making sure I can cat the BrowZer. No, oh, I'm on the wrong machine. So I have created an Amazon machine out there. That's where this stuff lives. BrowZer cleanup. Yeah. So I can cat my. Oh, I gotta SSH that machine. So I can cat my browser cleanup, and you can see what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop a service named BrowZer Bootstrapper. I'm going to stop my Ziti console service. I'm going to stop my Ziti router and stop my Ziti controller. I'm going to delete a user called Ziggy, and I'm going to delete a group called Ziti Web. If I type groups right now, you'll see my user is in this Ziti Web folder. And that's for a particular purpose. We'll get to that in a second. And then I'm going to remove my whole home folder. So this is like the ripcord. We're going to delete everything. So let's go ahead and run browser cleanup. Now, when I do that, if I were to go back and curl to not this one, now it'll no longer be there. Sad. The curl there failed to connect. All right, let's begin the process. All right, when you come to the new doc, you'll see there's a browser section right here. And this browser section is basically the overview of the steps that you're about to accomplish, or that you need to accomplish in order to enable browser. You can see I've already talked about an OIDC provider. So you'll need one of those. And if you don't know what that is, you might need to go and research what an OIDC provider is. You'll have to have an OpenZiti overlay network, obviously. You'll have to configure it using these things called external JWT signers, using authentication policies. Interesting and fun things that have been in Ziti for a while, but haven't gotten a tremendous amount of use from people yet. Hopefully browser will change that. Everybody will see how useful and powerful that is. And then let's see, you have to associate those identities to, you have to associate the identities to email addresses or some claim that the OIDC provider provides you. And then you're going to run the Bootstrapper, obviously, and this is how you would install it. And then you might want to enable your, that should be a capital Z with system D, so that if the machine stops and starts and restarts and all that sort of stuff, it'll come back online. So these are the general high-level overviews, not very detailed. Let's get into the actual nitty-gritty, very detailed steps. This is a sample. And so before you begin, we're using Bash. We're also going to use Linux. If you don't have Bash and if you don't have Linux, it's on you to figure out how to translate the Bash into ZSH or fish or whatever you want. And then we're going to use value for the wildcard domain. So you'll need a wildcard certificate. I think that was, let's go back to here, make sure that's highlighted. Yep, that's highlighted from a verifiable third-party CA. This is really important because your browser is going to create a TLS connection, and that TLS connection needs to be considered safe. Self-signed certificates are scary. People think they're not safe. You get the big, this site is not safe error. And so we need it to be valid, and we're going to use Let's Encrypt for that. So let's go ahead and go back and we'll check out the wildcard. This is the one that I'm using. And if I can copy, I will set this value in my shell. So let's come over to here. We will set that value. That's the first thing I need to do. I have to have Docker because I used certbot to collect or create and gather the certificate that's necessary for from Let's Encrypt. And so certbot has a little guide. We'll see that in a second. So I use Docker for that. You obviously need a OpenZiti network. We'll install that below. If you already have one, it's on you to figure out how to read between the lines. This guide is like start to finish, soup to nuts, take you from nothing to having a browser-based install working. And you need an OIDC provider. Also, if you log out and log back in, you got to set these values all over again. So what I'm going to do maybe is I'm going to edit the, let's call it just values.txt file. And I'm going to just keep track of the things I've set in my shell so that if I log out, hint, I'm going to have to, I can set those things back again. All right. And then you need an OIDC provider. We'll be using Auth0 in this case. Auth0 makes it real easy. You can actually use Auth0 to log in to Google. So like they federate out, which just makes things super easy. So we're going to stay with Auth0 just because it makes things easy. So first thing you got to do, get that wildcard certificate. To obtain a certificate, like I said, I used certbot. There's a bunch of different instructions on how to use certbot. Make sure you have the wildcard URL set and set your email address as shown. So when you go through this, you'll see your email at some server, and then what it will do is it will run certbot. So let's, I guess people can values.txt secret that what did I call it? Email? Your email. Your email. I don't think this one's a secret. So that's what I'm going to use. Okay. Boop, boop, boop. Okay. There's now that set. And then I'm going to run this command too. I'm going to actually clear my terminal and then run this. Okay. Now, when I run this, you see I've automatically agreed to the terms of service. And this is actually a super useful feature. It's telling me that I've already done the needful on as far as the DNS challenge. So if we come back to here, you can see it uses the DNS challenge. And so what will happen is there will be an acme challenge.yourdomain that needs to match what Let's Encrypt wants it to. So if we do a dig, we can do a dig plus short to acme challenge wildcard URL txt. And you can see I get a value back if I change this to, something that doesn't exist. No value back. So the fact that I get a value back means I've already accomplished this. You can do this dig right now and you'll see this value. It's proving that I have access to the domain. Let me echo this, to the domain acmechallenge.browzerexample.demo.org, right? So this is how certbot knows I own this particular domain and allows me to generate the Let's Encrypt certificates. And so that's what I did in order to create those certificates. So I've already done that. I'm not going to do it again. And now I need to enable people or other users to look at these certificates. When you first run your certbot, you'll see that root owns all of these things. And when root owns these things, it's a problem. And you'll see also now these folders have all been choned to a group called 2171. We'll see more about that later. But when root owns them all, you can't access them. Even the user that you just ran, certbot with can't access them. And that's a bummer. So to make it a little bit easier, we have an example of how you could optionally, if you want to, there's some little weasel words in here. This is up to you, right? This is not this is what you should do. This is an example that seems relatively reasonable way of going about adding, allowing other users to access these certificates. And by other users, really it means me, because I'm going to run this stuff as me, not as root. If you're running as root, then these don't pertain to you. But you can see what we're going to do is we're going to add a Ziti web group, and we're going to use the ID of 2171. So if we come back over to here, 2171, that might look familiar. We're going to make a user called Ziggy for the same particular purpose. And then what we'll do is we'll add Ziggy to the Ziti web group, and then we'll chown the folder recursively, and then we'll make sure that we can execute the files that we need to file. This is, I believe, does not grant you permission to execute a file and not a folder, so you can list them. That's not what I want. So I can just click the copy button. Now if I do that, ls, that was there from before, you'll see these are now owned by Ziti Web because there's an ID that matches 2171 created. And so if I were to copy this and do this, you'll see I get some certificates, and that's what you should see. Great, so far so good. Now we're going to install our whole OpenZiti overlay network. One moment, good cough. I am going to follow the host to anywhere with one important exception. We're going to use some variables before we run that quick start so that we can enable those Let's Encrypt certificates, and we're going to enable this alternative server cert stuff. So I've already set the wildcard URL, and so I can just come over to here and just paste that, and that's done. And now I can delete this section because that's useless. That probably should not be in a detail block. Now I can verify that I actually got to go through and install. So let's go through and do the host to anywhere install real quick. This is how easy it is. I've already actually set my external DNS. If you look at my bash rc. I'm using Amazon, and Amazon has this nice functionality where you can curl. Oops, I need to VI that file apparently. Where you can curl to this particular endpoint and receive your external DNS name. So that's a super easy way, if you're in Amazon, of getting your external DNS name. And so I don't have to set that, it's already set. Now I can just copy this block. This is what I always do every time I do it, and just run it. And then I can come down and I can just copy this block and I can just run it, which is what I always do. I'm gonna say no, and then I'm gonna move this off the screen while I put in my super secret password. Let it go by the screen, and once it's go by, now at the end of, so this is gonna keep installing. You can see it's chugging away down here. Right now we're running the quick start to install an OpenZiti overlay network, and when it's done, it's gonna point out my password. So I have to move this off screen at the moment. And so when this is all done, when I have an OpenZiti overlay network back up and running, and when I've cleared my password so that you can't see it, then I will bring this back on the screen. And it's creating a PKI, a complex PKI, and I'd say an overly complicated PKI as well. And that's meant to be educational, so that if you wanted to learn how all the PKI pieces go together, you can explore the configuration file. All right, so it has told me what my password is. I have cleared it. Things are now running. All right, so supposedly they're running anyway. And so if we come back, let's finish this off. Now I want to create a systemd unit. So I'll just copy and paste. Again, just copying and pasting. The helper, I don't need any of this. And now I'm going to copy and paste this section so that I move the units into the right place, and I run systemctl enable. And so now those things are running, and I can check that they're running by running these two commands right here. Bam, active and running, active and running. Cool. So things seem like they're working. Adding variables back to the shell, not relevant to me. I'll just leave the install Ziti console up because I'm going to need that too. So now it says after it's running, I can verify the install. So I can come over here, copy this, paste this, and you can see I've done a curl and I've used HTTPS. I didn't use a -K. -K means do an insecure curl. The next one you can see, I do an insecure curl. Oh. So I get the same results. So let's just take a real quick look at what that actual command I ran was. You can see in this command, I ran a curl to controller.browserexample.demo.openziti.org, port 8441. And here I ran a -sk because this URL will give you the scary your connection is not private because it uses a self-signed certificate. So the certificate is not valid because it's signed by me. As opposed to, if I go to this URL, you can see my browser is happy. Connection is secure. This is very important. Your browser needs to be happy for BrowZer to work. So now we have a happy browser. That's exciting. Let's come back over to here. So it looks like everything's working. Next, we have to have a WebSocket supported router on our overlay. Who wants to go make another virtual machine and set up a brand new router? Not this guy. So instead, we're going to use the existing router that we just deployed moments ago, and we're going to update it to provide WebSocket support. So if you follow the quick start, that's going to be right here. We just copy this. We just pay. Man, I got to keep copy on highlight. All right, here it is. And you can see in the instructions it says locate the binding section and add this below. I'm just going to copy it. Oh, you'll have to change browser example.demo to whatever your example is. Hopefully that's obvious, but if not, you'll have to do that. And you can see I've already done it once, and VI remembers exactly where I was, so it just puts me back there. And so I can paste. So now you'll see my router will listen on 8442 and 8447, and it will advertise this as the URL. And so things, okay. Now things should be good to go. Now we have to restart the edge router. That's because I use the unit file. That's easy. I can just call systemctl restart. And now I can verify that WebSocket is enabled by doing a simple curl there. Notice I'm using that ws.wildcard that I mentioned before, and you'll get this weird 404 error, which is totally acceptable. This is what we want to see. We want to see the 404 error. That just means you've made an HTTP request, not a WebSocket request. So perfectly expected to see the 404. Yep, so you should see and succeed a 404. I didn't show it below, so I have to show it below. Now I'm going to go install the Zach. I've already kept that guide open, so let's go do this. This is also very quick. I like to get clone method just because it's easy to copy and paste, assuming you don't overwrite your clipboard. So that went and cloned Zach, and then I'm going to install Zach by cding to there and running npm install. And then I'm going to link the self-signed certificates for Zach. In fact, I can actually skip this step. I think I'm going to skip this step. I'm going to skip this step because I don't need HTTPS because BrowZer is going to supply it for me. And then I'm going to use these commands to create a unit file, move it, enable it, just like we did before. That's all done. And so I should be all set. I think that's everything. Yep. Okay. So now if I do an ss minus lntp, I should see port 1408 available, and I should not see 8443. Now, if you linked the certificates, Zach will start up on TLS as well. So I can go ahead and just demonstrate that this time. Let's go back and actually link these certificates. Paste. Jeez, that copy is really kicking me. Do that, and then no, not enable. I don't want to enable Ziti console. I want to, let me make this bigger real quick. Come on, you can do it. I want to restart it. And I don't know if restarting it will do it, so let's just restart. Now when I run ss minus lntp, you'll see 8443 and 1408 are both running by process 511. That's not process 511. I don't have a PID on here. Maybe do a sudo so you'll see it. I PID 63378 63378 node. That's what we wanted to see. All right, so cool. So now we have the Ziti console running. It's running on TLS and HTTP. We're going to go back to our little guide. I don't need this anymore. Clicking on the wrong window. Happens a lot. All right, so now I have to configure my OIDC provider. And so if you don't have an OIDC provider, you got to go figure one. Like I said, we're going to use auth 0. I don't like these instructions. Actually, I think I might like these instructions. I don't know. Maybe if you try this out, maybe you'll tell us if these instructions work out or not. But when I go to auth 0, I'm going to log in. Maybe. Hello, spinning. Okay, now I'm logged in. Now I can go to here. How do I here? Yeah, the instructions will just show you how to do all this. I'm going to make a new application. You can see I've already made one called BrowZer Auth. I'm going to make a new one called BrowZer Auth, and this is in Ziti TV, so let's call it Ziti TV. I'm going to choose a single page web app like this, and then I'm going to get some information. I don't care. I just want the settings. Thank you. And so here are my secrets. You can't get my secret, which is good, but you can get a couple things for now. I'm going to get rid of this afterwards, so go ham if you want to. Come back to the actual doc itself. What does it tell us we need to do? It says to configure the callback URLs, the logout URLs, not the allowable web origins. I am still working on this, so let's leave that be. So if I come down, you'll see there is a allowed callback URLs and allowed logout URLs. And I'm using port 8446. This is another thing I have to fix because this is the first place in the doc that 8446 shows up. But down here, it'll be referenced. Where was it? I know it was in here, right there. It'll be referenced in this little section. We're going to get to that in a second. So I'm just going to move these sections around so that this makes more sense. But that's the value that I'm going to use in my application, save those changes. And now if I come back to this, it says I need a browser dev environment, but I don't want to use these auth domains and these, I don't want these values because I just made a brand new one. So if I come back to home, vd my values.txt, I go here like this. And then I come back to my auth0 page. I can get my domain, copy, go back over to here. I think the domain's going to be the same, but we'll delete everything anyway. And then I can change my client ID as well. If I do it correctly. Copy that client ID, paste it into here like this, and then I'm going to copy this and just run it in my terminal. So now I've set those two variables. I'm actually done with auth0. Now it says make sure your variables are set. Since we're doing this all in one big issue, it's not a big deal. I haven't logged out yet. I'm going to have all these things available. So I can just copy this. I can just paste this. It's a lot of stuff, but don't worry about it. You can read it. Obviously, you should read it. Then it says to inspect the file. So you should see something like this. Open this file up and just make sure that it looks right. So let's go ahead and copy this. We'll just go ahead and just make sure it looks right. And all I'm looking for is like quotes, 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 quotes. I got BrowZer. It looks right. Like that's how long it should take to verify that it looks right. I'm going to install BrowZer. And so now it says BrowZer's ready to be installed. Go to the main browser page. You can do it by cloning it or running it via Docker. I'm going to do it with cloning it because, I got to provide a better link apparently. Because cloning it it's kind of drops it simple. So I'll do the same thing, clone the same thing, just like I did with the Zach. CD there. I need a better copy and paste button on that one. CD to there. Run a yarn install. And then start the server. Now I'm going to actually skip this particular part because down below it says I can enable my browser with the Z with systemd. And that actually is better. That's what I actually wanted to do. And so I'm going to, oh no, that's a mistake. I need to create a browser. Let's again make my screen bigger here. I need to create a browser systemd file, not a Zach systemd file. So that's a mistake. Then when that's done, it says that it writes the Bootstrapper systemd file has been written to here. Let me put myself back on. Maybe I'll go to this view. Yeah, maybe that'll work. So now it wrote a systemd file. So now when the machine reboots, does it get bigger? Doesn't really make a difference. When the machine reboots, BrowZer will start back up again. And so now I can just copy these values as well and run them. And when that's complete, I should now be able to verify BrowZer started by running the status command. You can see it's active. So far, so good. Everything's working the way it's intended to work. One thing I don't know, am I still in groups? Oops, I'm in the wrong window. Groups. Oh, okay. I didn't log out, so I'm still in Ziti Web. So that just works out for me. Fantastic. That's why I can still see that's why I can see the Let's Encrypt files. And so we're good to go. BrowZer's been started, and now I'm going to come back to my example doc. Now I got to prepare the OpenZiti network itself. And so I got to log in. Ziti command not found. So I got to do a source of Ziti quick start ip.env. Ziti should be on the path. There we go. Now I can log in. All right, cool. And so now I can configure my JWT signer. The JWT signer is, I'd say it's probably complicated. I don't know if I can get into it right now, but basically when you authenticate to the IDP will return something called a JWT or a JOT, which is a signed document, cryptographically verifiable type of document. And that's what Ziti is going to use. So when that JWT comes back, it's going to have a claim inside of it. And that claim will be my email address. And so if you look at the way we create this external JWT signer down here, it says use the claims property of email. And so when I log in to Auth0 and it sends back a JWT to OpenZiti, OpenZiti is going to be looking for an email field claim with Clint at OpenZiti.org in it. And I just realized oh, okay, that's going to be a problem because that's not the right email. So I'll put the right email in. All right, and so you can basically just copy and paste this if you want to read it and understand it, by all means. But I'm going to just blast it out right here. And you can see what it does is it goes out to the issuer, it finds the well-known JWT endpoint, and then it assigns it to an external JWT signer and an auth policy. If you read through the doc here, it wants you to make sure, not this one, it says, ensure the IDs for the signer and auth policy have some value and aren't blank. So just make sure these things aren't empty. If they're empty, something went wrong and you'll have to figure out what and why and how. All right, next, add a service to access HTTP web app. So we've already created our browser, we've already installed Zach. So now we can make a service that Ziti can intercept. And so this one I'm going to pause on and I'm going to explain it just a tiny bit, more so than what the doc goes through, because BrowZer is going to find the correct service by this Ziti browser service.ziti intercept address, which all of these little puzzle pieces were lovingly crafted by me, put together in the right way so that you can just copy and paste all this, right? And so if we look somewhere else, we should find this. I don't know if it's expanded or not. It probably is up in here. Actually, don't know where it is. Maybe it's not. Maybe it'll dial it by its name. Actually, maybe I should ask Kurt that one. It might actually dial it by name. So I'll take it back. That intercept address may or may not be interesting and important. I actually don't know. So we can learn that together too. Same with the intercept port. I do believe the Ziti Bootstrap runtime, the ZBR, will dial this particular service inside of the magic that is BrowZer. So this might be an area that needs a bit more fleshing out, because if I'm confused, people out there are probably going to be confused too. But what's important, also notice the offload address. Because I'm using that edge router that out in my quick start, I can offload to 127.0.0.1, because this curl http ://127.0.0.1:1408, because this is where Zach is running, and it redirects you to /login if you don't go to login yourself. So that's what these two things are for. And then here's a cute little bash function that will just create all of the necessities that you need. It'll create a config, it'll create a service, it'll create service policies granting you access. So if your identity roles has the particular binders or the dialers on it, then you'll be good to go. In fact, I should call that out because that's going to be relevant down below. So let's just go ahead and copy it and run this. And when we're done, we'll see, actually, verify the command succeed, no errors shown. They all did succeed, no errors were shown. And so now what we have to do is the final step before we can try it out is we have to associate an identity with, and I've got my actual email address in there, so have that too. We have to associate an identity with an email address. Because remember, the IDP will send back an email address, and Ziti will trust that the IDP is safe. Well, it'll actually verify, not trust. It'll actually verify that the JWT was signed by the proper authority, set up in that little section up above, and verify that the email address that you said was the field to look for that you pull out of that JWT will match an identity. And so this little example does all this magic for you. So this is a little, it looks so easy, but there's some stuff in here that you might have to grok to understand what's going on. But you can see I'm going to set a variable in my shell called Ziti BrowZer identities. It's a space delimited list, so if you wanted to put more than one person, you can. And then we're just going to just run a simple bash for loop. And the bash for loop is just going to say for every identity in that list, run ZDEdge create an identity, associate the auth policy that we've used before. We created somewhere up here, this auth policy. Associate the auth policy. Where is it? Associate the external ID. So this is the email address, and then associate it with an attribute that is the Ziti BrowZer service dialers. So give this identity the dialers attribute so that it can actually dial. And then go through and update the Ziti router that comes with a quick start with the binders service so that the router can actually bind that service. So we'll run all those things too. New identity created for Clint. Everything looks right. After you run, you should see some command output that looks like this. Perfect. And it says company name here, but it says NetFoundry up here. So now let's just try it out. This is my attempt at making it easy to give you a little command that you can run that tells you what your URL is. So if everything works, this will just work. So let's go ahead and click on it. Oh my goodness. And it actually just worked. So let me refresh this so you can see I'm not cheating. I'm not a liar. Look at that. And so now I can log in. Now, the very first time you go to Zach, you have to provide the controller name. So let's say local controller. And then a URL, it's going to be https://127.0.0.1:8441. As Zach, BrowZer Bootstrapper, router, and controller are all running right here on this local machine. So you can see, there it is. And so now I've set my controller. I can give it my username. And if I did the password correctly, I've logged in. And that, I mean, I'm pleased as punch. I think that was a great killer Ziti TV and showed you how to take a network from nothing, or a machine from nothing, to having a browser bootstrap agent ready and working. Now, what I probably should have prepared, and I didn't, and this is some of the magic that you'll have to, like, there's a lot of stuff. It looks easy. It was easy. It quote unquote only took me 47 minutes, right? But I mean, I explained all this stuff. You doing it at home, you could just copy and paste. It'd be a lot faster. Like, I could do all that in under 5 minutes. But there is a lot of learning that has to happen to understand, what's going on there. One of the most important bits is not env. Yeah, it is env. Yeah, is this M file that got emitted, that was emitted when I ran up here .env. Where is it? This one. So when I generated this browser.env file, I should probably make that a little b because technically it's wrong, but whatever. When I generated this file, this right here, this is really important. This is what tells BrowZer how to enable that particular service. This is the magic. And so if I come back over to here and look at it in a little bit bigger, you can see I've got my IDP issuer base URL. You can use more than one IDP if you want. I've got the client ID for this IDP. Scheme is HTTP because we're using HTTP. And here is the URL that a user will go to. So if you remember, if I go back over here, this URL is the same. That's the URL that a user will go to in order to kick all this off. This port is important. So this browser.env file, it's really important. If you look at the etc system, Ziti, BrowZer Bootstrapper service, if you'll see in here, it's referencing this environment variable, environment file. So this file is really useful. If you wanted to add another service, you would just edit the $ZT home browser.m file, put a little comma at the end. Where is it? Something like this. Maybe not like that. Maybe like this, comma, and then copy all this and rinse, repeat, make a new service. Now, you also have to know the name of the service, right? So this goes back to that intercept thing. Maybe I don't need the intercept because it is dialing it by service name. And so you need the name of the service, you need the IDP config, and you need to know where users will find this particular service in the BrowZer Bootstrap agent. Whew, I feel like I've been talking for a long time. I think that was really exciting. I've enjoyed this Ziti TV. I'm also pleased as punch that it all worked. So hopefully, relatively soon, you'll see that document get pushed out to the real doc site. And there weren't any questions or comments, so that'll be our Ziti TV.